Before there were heroes who wore capes, there were those who wore lion skins. Before there were epic quests written in novels, there were labors carved into the fabric of myth itself. And among all heroes of the ancient world, none loomed larger than a demigod whose strength shook mountains, whose rage terrified kings, and whose labors were said to purify the world itself. This is the story of Heracles, or as the Romans called him, Hercules. His life is not just a series of monster fights. It's a saga of divine betrayal, unbearable guilt, clever trickery, impossible challenges, and the relentless pursuit of redemption. Across 12 legendary labors and beyond, Hercules would cross seas, descend into the underworld, outwit titans, wrestle beasts that no mortal could face, and in the process become a symbol of human endurance against divine cruelty. Cruelty. But to understand his labors, we must start long before the first monster fell. We must return to a time when gods mingled freely with mortals, when the jealousies of Olympus shaped human destiny, and when a single birth sent shockwaves through heaven itself. This is the complete story of the 12 labors of Hercules, explained like never before. Zeus, Alcmene, and the birth of Hercules long before Hercules swung his mighty club, a quiet drama unfolded in Thebes. Alcmene, a mortal woman of extraordinary beauty and virtue, was married to Amphitryon, a Theban prince. But their union caught the attention of someone far greater, Zeus, king of the gods. Known for his unending appetites and trickster nature, Zeus descended to the mortal world under the cover of night, not as himself, but disguised as Amphitryon. He extended the night to 3 times its normal length, filling it with divine passion. By dawn, Alcmene was unknowingly pregnant with the child of a god. Yet even before Hercules was born, Hera, Zeus's wife, knew. She had endured Zeus's infidelities countless times, but this one would wound her pride deeply. For the child to come, a demigod was prophesied to rule the house of Perseus. Hera's hatred flared. She schemed not merely to torment this child, but to control his destiny from the moment of birth. When Alcmene went into labor, Hera intervened in a way only a goddess could. She sent her daughter, Alethea, goddess of childbirth, to sit at the door and hold back the birth pains magically. Meanwhile, she hastened the labor of another woman, Eurystheus, a distant relative. By divine manipulation, Eurystheus was born first, making him legally the ruler of the house of Perseus. Hercules would grow up strong, but he would always be fated to serve Eurystheus, a mortal king, far beneath his divine power. Finally, through the cunning of Alcmene's maid Galanthus, who tricked Eileithyia into standing up, the spell was broken, and the baby Hercules entered the world. His birth was not greeted by peace, but by omens, divine resentment, and cosmic schemes. From his very first cry, Hercules was a target not just of beasts and tyrants, but of the jealous queen of Olympus herself. Hera's wrath serpents in the cradle. Hera wasted no time. She would not wait for Hercules to grow into a threat. She would strike while he was helpless. One silent night, she sent 2 enormous serpents into the nursery, where baby Hercules lay beside his twin brother, Iphicles. The snakes slithered over the floor, their scales whispering like dry leaves, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Their fangs were ready to sink into the infants. But this was no ordinary child. Even in his cradle, Hercules possessed the strength of a god. As the serpents lunged, the baby reached out with his tiny hands and seized them by their throats. He squeezed hard. By the time his parents rushed in, Hercules was laughing, swinging the dead snakes like toys, while his mortal twin screamed in terror. It was the first sign that this child was destined for extraordinary deeds. This event spread quickly through Thebes. Priests interpreted the serpent slaying as a divine omen. Oracles spoke of a child who would perform impossible labors and bring glory to Greece. Amphitryon began to suspect the child's true parentage, and Alcmene remained silent, knowing the dangers of Zeus's love. Hera, however, seethed. Her plan had failed, but her hatred was only beginning. For Hera's wrath was not a single act. It was a lifelong vendetta. Unlike other mortals, Hercules would not simply face fate. He would face a goddess's obsessive persecution. Every triumph of his would be met with new obstacles. Every victory would come at a cost. and Hera was patient. Youthful feats. Hercules' early heroism. Hercules did not grow up as a quiet prince. He trained under the finest teachers of Greece in music, wrestling, archery, and philosophy. But his brutal strength often outpaced his discipline. When instructed in music by Linus, Hercules struck his teacher dead with a lyre after being scolded. It was not malice, it was uncontrolled power. Recognizing this, Amphitryon sent him to the countryside to herd cattle and live closer to the earth. There, away from courtly restraint, Hercules developed his physical might to an astonishing degree. He wrestled lions, fought bandits, and even defended the borders of Thebes against invaders. One famous story tells of how, as a young man, he defended Thebes from the minions, defeating their champion and earning the hand of Megara, the king's daughter. Hercules became a symbol of youthful invincibility, admired by all for his courage and raw power. Yet beneath the victories, a tension brewed. Hercules was a demigod walking among mortals. His strength inspired awe, but it also isolated him. Mortals could not match him. Gods manipulated him. He belonged fully to neither world. This emotional distance would set the stage for his greatest tragedy, and the reason for the labors that would define his legend. Tragedy in Thebes, madness, and murder. If Zeus gave Hercules his strength, Hera gave him his greatest torment. Years after his marriage to Megara and the birth of their children, Hera struck. She descended upon him with divinely induced madness, twisting his perceptions until loved ones became enemies. In a frenzy of delusion, Hercules believed his family were hostile strangers. He took up his bow, club, and hands and slaughtered his wife and children in a night of unspeakable horror. When the madness cleared, Hercules stood amid the carnage, horrified. The strongest man in Greece was powerless against his own mind. This moment shattered him. Unlike his earlier feats, this was not a battle he could simply win. It was an irreversible tragedy, and it would define his destiny forever after. The Greeks believed that even heroes must atone for their crimes. Hercules, racked by guilt, sought guidance from the Oracle of Delphi. There, under the influence of Hera again, the oracle pronounced his punishment. He must serve King Eurystheus, the very man. Hera had arranged to be born first and complete a series of impossible labors. It's only through these labors could he purify himself of the blood on his hands. Thus, the stage was set. The strongest hero of Greece would now become a servant, forced to face monsters, gods, and impossible challenges, not for glory, but for redemption. The oracle's decree, a life of atonement. The Oracle of Delphi was the voice of Apollo, and when Hercules approached her, he was not greeted with comfort. She spoke in riddles and fire. His crimes could not be washed away by prayer or exile, only by serving Eurystheus, the king of tyrants. Why, in completing 12 labors chosen by him, could Hercules hope to regain his place among the living? This was not merely punishment. In Greek belief, miasma, or spiritual pollution, followed those who committed terrible acts. A murderer, even unintentionally, carried a stain that could spread to others. Hercules' labors were acts of catharsis, purification. Through suffering and struggle, he could cleanse himself. And so Hercules journeyed to Eurystheus' court. The king, a cowardly man, but shrewd in political games, saw an opportunity. With Hera whispering in his ear, he designed tasks meant to be impossible beasts that could not be killed, places mortals could not reach, enemies beyond the mortal realm. He intended not to purify Hercules, but to destroy him. But what Eurystheus did not understand was this. Hercules' labors would not just redeem him, they would transform him into legend. Each labor would push the limits of what it meant to be mortal, divine, and heroic. The Nemean lion. A beast with impenetrable hide, the plains and hills around Nemea were once quiet, dotted with olive groves, vineyards, and scattered hamlets. But in the time of Hercules, they lived under the shadow of a terror. Shepherds whispered of a monstrous lion that prowled at night, leaving only torn carcasses behind. It lurked in the caves of Mount Troodos, a place so rugged and remote that even seasoned hunters avoided it. This was not a mere predator, it was the Nemean lion, born, according to myth, from Typhon and Echidna, the primordial parents of monsters. From its very birth, this creature was meant to test heroes. Its golden hide was said to be impervious to mortal weapon swords, would bend, spears would splinter, and arrows would bounce off as if striking iron. When King Eurystheus assigned Hercules this first labor, it was not simply a mission of extermination, it was a divine initiation. Hera herself had raised the lion to be Hercules' first impossible task. In Greek myth, monsters often symbolize forces of nature and chaos. Here the lion represented something primal, raw, unconquerable strength, the kind that no weapon could subdue. Hercules' challenge was to face this force not as a soldier, but as a hero who must transcend human limits. Upon arriving in Nemea, Hercules began by questioning locals and tracking the lion's movements. They told him of its lair with 2 entrances, its nightly hunts, and the futility of the many hunters who had tried and failed. Hercules strung his bow, approached carefully, and loosed his arrows, but each shaft fell useless, clattering to the rocky ground. The lion, unharmed, let out a roar so thunderous it echoed across the hills, announcing that this would be no ordinary hunt. Realizing brute weaponry was useless, Hercules adapted. He studied the caves to entrances and came up with a bold plan. He would trap the lion inside. Rolling massive boulders, he blocked one entrance, sealing off its escape. Then, club in hand, he entered through the other. In that dark, confined space, a man and a monster would meet on equal ground, no arrows, no escape, only strength against strength. The fight was savage. The lion lunged, its claws tearing through Hercules' cloak and armor. He grappled it, using every ounce of his strength to pin it. Like any beast he had faced before, the lion did not panic. It thrashed with relentless fury, biting and clawing with supernatural power. Hercules finally managed to get his arms around its neck, locking it in a crushing chokehold. For minutes, they struggled, until at last the lion's body went limp. The demigod had achieved what no man or weapon could. He defeated the beast with his bare hands. This first labor was more than a test of strength, it was a rite of passage. Heroes in Greek myth often undergo an initiation by confronting chaos directly. By killing the lion with his hands, Hercules showed he could transcend normal human limitations. He wasn't just a strong man anymore. He was stepping into the realm of the mythic hero, a figure who could wrestle the very symbols of fear into submission. Wrestling the lion, the birth of the club, and lion skin with the beast slain, another problem emerged: how to prove it. Eurystheus had demanded the lion's hide as evidence, but no blade could pierce it. Hercules tried his dagger, his sword, even sharpened stones. Nothing worked. Then, according to one version, Athena appeared, guiding him to use the lion's own claws. These claws, being as sharp as any blade forged by gods or mortals, easily cut through the hide. Carefully removed the pelt, cleaning it, and then draped it over himself, wearing the lion's head as a hood. This moment is one of the most iconic transformations in Greek mythology. Before this, Hercules was simply a strong man with divine blood. After it, he became the image of a hero, instantly recognizable, lion-skin cloak, club in hand. He fashioned a great wooden club from an olive tree, a weapon that reflected his nature: simple, brutal, unstoppable. Unlike ornate bronze weapons, the club symbolized raw power and a connection to nature. When he returned to Eurystheus with the lion's carcass, the king was horrified. He had expected Hercules to die in the attempt, not to stride into his palace wearing the beast's hide like a trophy. Eurystheus was so terrified that he banned Hercules from entering the city ever again. Future labors would be reported to him from outside the gates. This reaction sets the tone for the rest of the Mythurus, becomes a petty, fearful ruler, while Hercules grows ever more godlike in his achievements. Culturally, this chapter also explains the visual language of Hercules in Greek art. From vase paintings to temple reliefs, the lion skin and club appear everywhere. They weren't just costume pieces. They were symbols. The lion skin signified invincibility and conquest of chaos, while the club showed natural strength over artificial weaponry. Together, they made Hercules a cultural icon recognizable across the ancient Mediterranean. In some cults, wearing a lion skin became a ritual act, initiates, and athletes sometimes donned similar cloaks during festivals, invoking the power of Hercules. His triumph over the Nemean lion became more than a story. It became a living tradition, part of Greek identity and religious life. Cultural echoes, lions and Greek symbolism. The choice of a lion as Hercules' first opponent was deliberate. By the classical period, lions were rare in Greece, but in earlier Arise especially, the Bronze Age, they roamed parts of the Balkans and Anatolia. Greek artists and poets inherited lion imagery from older civilizations, like the Assyrians and Persians, who used lions as symbols of kingship, strength, and cosmic power. When Hercules defeats the lion, he's not just conquering a beast. He's symbolically defeating a royal, divine force. Throughout the Mediterranean, depictions of heroes slaying lions were a shared language. Egyptian pharaohs hunted lions to prove their right to rule. Mesopotamian kings carved reliefs of themselves, overpowering lions barehanded. By echoing this tradition, the Greeks placed Hercules in a broader mythic continuum, making him their own champion in a world of shared heroic archetypes. The lion's impenetrable hide also carried religious undertones. It embodied the concept of untamed nature, forces that neither blade nor civilization could subdue. Hercules' victory symbolized human mastery over chaos, a central theme in Greek myth. It is no coincidence that his labors begin here, with an act that asserts heroic order over primal wildness. Later Greek poets like Pindar referenced this labor in odes, treating it as Hercules' true beginning. By defeating the lion, he did not merely win a fight. He established his mythic identity, setting the stage for every deed that followed. Festivals like the Nemean Games were even founded in his honor, complete with athletic contests that echoed his strength. In this way, the Nemean lion became more than a story. It was a cultural cornerstone, celebrated in poetry, art, and ritual, shaping how the Greeks saw heroism itself. The Lernaean Hydra, serpents, and regeneration. The second labor was more sinister. Hercules was sent to the marshes of Lerna, a place known in myth as a gateway to the underworld. There, in the stagnant waters and mists, lived the Lernaean Hydra, a monstrous serpent with multiple heads, one of which was immortal. Its breath was poisonous, its blood corrosive, and for every head cut off, 2 more would grow back. This creature wasn't simply strong, it represented perpetual, multiplying chaos. When Hercules arrived, he covered his mouth and nose against the toxic fumes. He began by shooting flaming arrows into the swamp, forcing the Hydra to emerge. What came out was a writhing, hissing monstrosity, its head snapping in all directions. Hercules charged, hacking off heads with his sword, but as fast as he cut, new heads sprouted, doubling the threat. His usual strategy of overwhelming power only made things worse. Hera, determined to see him fail, sent a giant crab to attack his feet while he fought. This odd detail shows how even nature itself seemed to side against Hercules. He crushed the crab beneath his heel, but the Hydra seized the moment to coil around him, constricting like a python. For the first time, Hercules was caught in a struggle he could not brute force his way through. The Hydra is often interpreted as a symbol of disease or pestilence cut off one infection, and it spreads. Lerna was known for its swampy, stagnant waters, places where illness festered. Ancient audiences would have recognized this imagery instinctively. Hercules wasn't just fighting a monster, he was battling a living embodiment of plague. The Erymanthian boar, terror of the mountains. High in the rugged, snow-covered mountains of Arcadia lurked a creature that made even the bravest hunters tremble, the Erymanthian boar. This wasn't an ordinary wild pig. Ancient storytellers described it as colossal, with tusks like daggers and a temper like a thunderstorm. It rampaged through villages, uprooting trees, destroying crops, and chasing terrified farmers down icy slopes. When Eurystheus assigned this labor to Hercules, it seemed like a cruel joke. Capturing a beast alive, not slaying it, meant the hero would need more than strength. He'd need patience, cunning, and endurance against the winter itself. Hercules began by gathering what information he could from local Arcadians. They spoke of the creature as if it were a force of nature, appearing suddenly from the mists, tearing through fields, then vanishing into the highlands where few dared follow. Determined, Hercules set off into the wilderness, climbing through freezing winds and treacherous terrain. Along the way, he stopped at the cave of the centaur Pholus, who offered him shelter and hospitality. But what should have been a moment of rest soon spiraled into chaos when Hercules uncorked a jar of sacred wine, its scent attracting other centaurs. A violent brawl erupted, arrows flew, and blood was spilled, foreshadowing that this labor wouldn't be a simple hunt. After leaving Pholus' cave, Hercules pressed deeper into the mountains. He tracked the boar by its destructive path, smashed trees, gouged earth, and snow stained with the remains of unlucky animals. The higher he climbed, the colder and more brutal the weather became. Hercules wasn't fighting just the beast, he was battling nature itself. The boar, meanwhile, was perfectly at home in this harsh domain. It moved swiftly through snowdrifts, vanishing like a ghost whenever Hercules drew near. The hunt turned into a dangerous game of endurance, with the hero refusing to give up. Finally, Hercules spotted his quarry, the boar rooting near a frozen glade. Rather than charge in recklessly, he devised a clever plan. He chased the creature uphill, using its own strength against it. As it ran higher, the snow deepened, slowing the beast's movements. At the perfect moment, Hercules lunged forward, grabbed it by the flanks, and wrestled it into submission with his immense strength. The boar thrashed and squealed, but the snow held it just long enough for Hercules to bind it with chains. Dragging the massive creature down the mountain was almost as impressive as capturing it, when Hercules finally returned to Eurystheus' palace. The king was so terrified by the sight of the living boar that he reportedly hid inside a giant storage jar. For Hercules, this wasn't just another triumph of muscle, it was proof of his growing ability to outthink his foes. The labor of the Erymanthian boar showcased not just his brute power, but his adaptability, patience, and resilience against both beast and nature. Wrestling the beast in snow and ice. With the boar finally cornered, Hercules knew brute force alone wouldn't guarantee success. The beast had been terrorizing Arcadia for years precisely because it was cunning and swift, vanishing into snowy mists whenever hunters drew close. Hercules had deliberately chased it uphill, where thick snowdrifts could become his ally. As the boar tried to flee through the deep powder, its massive bulk became its downfall. Its movements slowed, its once sagile legs trapped in the white wilderness. Hercules leapt forward, grappling it with precision, using not only strength, but his knowledge of terrain to pin the creature down. The struggle was brutal. The boar thrashed and squealed, kicking up snow like a winter storm. Each movement could have disemboweled a lesser man. But Hercules dug in, feet braced, muscles straining. Slowly, he wrapped his arms around its neck and torso, forcing it down into the snow. Unlike the Nemean lion, this was not a duel to the death. The hero had to keep it alive. His patience, honed through previous labors, paid off. With practiced skill, he bound the beast in chains, securing its tusks to prevent any sudden gore-filled surprises. The descent down the mountains was almost as challenging as the capture itself. Dragging a massive, furious boar through treacherous slopes, while snow continued to fall, required Herculean endurance. Locals watched in awe as the hero returned, hauling the creature like a living trophy. Some sang songs of his courage, others whispered that he was more god than man. For Hercules, however, this was simply one more task completed, no time for celebration. When he presented the beast to Eurystheus, the cowardly king panicked, leaping into a storage jar to hide. The scene often depicted in ancient vase art wasn't just comedic. Symbolized the growing fear and jealousy Eurystheus held toward Hercules' ever-expanding legend. This labor was about more than catching a boar. It demonstrated Hercules' evolution, no longer simply smashing through obstacles. He was learning to outthink them. The mountain, the weather, and the beast itself were all opponents, and Hercules had mastered them all in one brilliant, snowy hunt. Centaurs and chaos, an unexpected battle. The story of the Erymanthian boar is intertwined with one of Hercules' most chaotic encounters, the centaur skirmish. Before setting off for the boar, Hercules had taken shelter in the cave of Pholus, a wise and kind centaur who welcomed him with food and conversation. Pholus offered him a jar of sacred wine, traditionally reserved for all centaurs to share in harmony. But when Hercules opened it, the scent spread far through the valleys, rousing other centaurs who believed their communal treasure had been stolen. They arrived in a furious swarm, half men, half horses, armed with rocks, tree branches, and bows. What began as hospitality turned into a wild battle. Hercules, ever the warrior, responded instinctively, firing poisoned arrows that sent centaurs fleeing or falling. The snowy slopes became a battlefield, echoing with the thunder of hooves and shouts. Even wise Chiron, the immortal teacher of heroes, was accidentally struck by one of Hercules' arrows, a tragic moment that would have lasting mythological consequences. Pholus, curious about Hercules' arrows, accidentally dropped one and it pierced his hoof, killing him instantly due to the Hydra's poison. His death deeply affected Hercules. Though he was accustomed to violence, this was different. A friend lost, not an enemy vanquished. The centaur incident showed the dangerous ripple effect of divine labors. Hercules' quests didn't happen in isolation. It caused chaos across Greece, often harming those who merely stood near his path. The incident also highlighted the complexity of Greek myth. Not every battle is neatly divided between good and evil. The centaurs were protectors of their traditions. Hercules, a foreign force who disrupted their harmony, became both hero and intruder. By the time he finally resumed his journey toward the Boar, the land behind him was scarred, physically and symbolically. The labor had grown far beyond a simple hunt, intertwining themes of hospitality, misunderstanding, divine weaponry, and unintended tragedy. The Augean stables, filth beyond imagination. For his next task, Eurystheus assigned Hercules something that sounded almost insulting: cleaning the Augean stables. These belonged to King Augeas of Elis, who owned thousands of cattle. The stables hadn't been cleaned in decades, and the result was an unimaginable buildup of filth. This was no simple chore. The waste stretched like hills, and the stench carried for miles. Eurystheus clearly intended the task to humiliate Hercules rather than challenge him in combat. When Hercules arrived, he made a clever deal with Augeas. If he could clean the stables in a single day, he'd receive 1/10 of the king's herd. Augeas, thinking it impossible, agreed. But Hercules wasn't going to shovel manure by hand. Surveying the land, he noticed 2 great rivers nearby, the Alpheus and Peneus. He realized that strength alone wouldn't solve this. Ingenuity would. Using brute force to break down walls and carve new channels, Hercules redirected the rivers straight through the stables. The rushing water tore through decades of filth, flushing it all out in a single mighty torrent. By the end of the day, the stables were spotless, something no one thought possible. It was a feat of both physical and strategic brilliance. When Augeas refused to pay the agreed reward, claiming trickery, Hercules took him to court. The king's son sided with Hercules, exposing his father's dishonesty. This would set the stage for future conflict between Hercules and Augeas. But more importantly, it showed that heroism wasn't always about slaying beasts. Sometimes meant outsmarting a challenge as much as overpowering it. Diverting rivers, Hercules' ingenious solution. While the Augean stables themselves were the focus of the labor, what truly amazed later storytellers wasn't the cleaning, it was the method. Hercules' decision to reroute to powerful rivers was revolutionary. He smashed through stone walls with his bare hands and carved channels deep into the earth. This wasn't a mindless display of power. It was engineering on a mythic scale. In Greek literature, this act symbolized mankind's ability to tame nature, to bend the wild world to human will through strength and intellect combined. The force of the Alpheus and Peneus rivers surged like unleashed beasts, flooding through the filthy stables and carrying decades of accumulated waste away in mere hours. Hercules stood atop the flow, guiding its direction, ensuring the structure didn't collapse entirely. The ancient Greeks admired this because it showed a hero who wasn't simply a brute fighter, but a thinker capable of monumental feats. Poets later likened this act to cleansing the land of moral corruption, a purification ritual disguised as manual labor. The act of diverting rivers echoed symbolic themes in Greek religion, where flowing water was often linked with renewal and divine justice. Hercules, whether he knew it or not, was participating in a sacred act of renewal for Elis. But this triumph also set in motion subtle political tensions. By interfering so drastically with the land and waters of Elis, Hercules wasn't just doing a job, he was changing the terrain, asserting power over another king's territory. In a world where rivers were lifelines, his feet carried weight far beyond the stable's walls. Politics of purification, Elis, and power. King Augeas' refusal to honor his agreement lit the spark for future conflict. In Greek society, oaths and hospitality were sacred. To betray a deal was not only dishonorable, but potentially sacrilegious. Hercules, enraged by Augeas' deception, took the matter to court. The scene was dramatic. The son of Augeas, loyal to truth, testified in Hercules' favor, exposing his father's lies. It was one of the rare moments in Hercules' saga where justice played out through law rather than bloodshed. The trial humiliated Augeas. Though Hercules did not immediately retaliate with violence, the seeds of vengeance were planted. Years later, Hercules would return to Elis to punish Augeas and his allies, turning a seemingly simple labor into the origin of a political feud. This shows how many of the labors had ripple effects across Greece. They weren't isolated heroic episodes, but interconnected events with real geopolitical consequences. In the cultural imagination, the cleansing of the stables was seen not only as a physical cleaning, but a purging of royal corruption. Augeas, who had grown complacent and greedy, represented stagnation. Hercules, as the agent of cleansing, embodied divine justice, sent to sweep away rot literally and metaphorically. This chapter of his labors reminds us that Hercules wasn't merely performing tasks. He was reshaping regions, challenging rulers, and leaving political shockwaves behind him. The Augean stables became a timeless metaphor for any massive, morally filthy situation requiring radical cleansing, a phrase we still use today. The Stymphalian bird's death from above for his next labor, Hercules was sent to the marshes of Stymphalus in Arcadia. This region was plagued by terrifying man-eating birds with bronze beaks, razor-sharp feathers, and an appetite for human flesh. They flocked in great numbers, darkening the sky and making the swamps uninhabitable. Unlike previous labors, this one posed a unique challenge. Hercules couldn't simply overpower the creatures in close combat. They were too numerous and airborne. The marshes themselves were treacherous. The ground was soft, the air thick with mist, and the flocks nested deep in inaccessible areas. Locals feared to even approach, whispering of flapping wings that brought death like a storm. Hercules wandered into this eerie wetland, where silence would suddenly break with the screeching of metal-like wings. A supernatural horror compared to anything he had faced before. Ancient sources often describe this labor as a turning point. Here, Hercules had to adapt. Brute strength alone would be useless against a swarm that could simply retreat into the air. For once he needed strategy, and perhaps help from beyond mortal means. This sets the stage for one of the most fascinating collaborations in Hercules' story, his partnership with Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warcraft, who saw potential in the hero's struggle and chose to intervene. Athena's aid, rattles, and flight. Athena, descending from Olympus, handed Hercules a strange gift forged by Hephaestus, a bronze rattle known as a crotalon. Its piercing sound could echo across the marshes, startling even supernatural creatures. This was no ordinary instrument, it was divine technology. Hercules took the rattle and climbed to a vantage point, where he shook it with all his might. The resulting clamor shattered the eerie stillness, sending the Stymphalian birds into a panic. Startled from their nests, they rose into the air in a frenzied cloud.
Out.
This was exactly what Hercules needed. Drawing his bow, he unleashed arrow after arrow into the sky, his aim precise, his strength relentless. Many birds fell, their metallic feathers clattering against the swamp. The survivors fled far from Arcadia, never to return. Athena's role here was crucial, highlighted that even the mightiest heroes benefited from divine guidance and ingenuity. Hercules didn't charge blindly into danger. He used tools, tactics, and support, proving he was capable of more than brute violence. This episode also emphasizes the balance of Greek heroism, raw power and divine wisdom working hand in hand. Without Athena's clever intervention, Hercules might have been stuck swatting at shadows forever in that misty swamp. Bird monsters and ancient symbolism. The Stymphalian birds weren't just random monsters. They carried deep symbolic weight in Greek thought. Birds often represented omens or messages from the gods, and creatures like these inverted that symbolism, becoming harbingers of death rather than divine guidance. Their bronze beaks and deadly feathers reflected how nature itself could become weaponized. A theme that resonated with the Greeks, who saw the natural world as both nurturing and terrifying. Some scholars believe the myth may have originated from real migratory flocks that devastated crops or terrified isolated communities with their numbers. Over time, these natural occurrences were mythologized into stories of deadly bird swarms, transformed into monsters to embody chaos. Additionally, The location of marsh was crucial. Marshes in Greek mythology were liminal spaces, places between the civilized and the wild, between life and death. Creatures lurking there symbolized dangers from the margins of the known world. Hercules' triumph wasn't merely about killing birds. It was about restoring order to a landscape where nature had run amok. In later art and literature, depictions of the Stymphalian birds became metaphors for overwhelming but conquerable chaos, problems that scatter when faced with courage and cleverness. This labor reinforced Hercules' role as both protector and civilizer, driving out forces that threatened human settlement. The Cretan bull, King Minos' burden. Hercules' next challenge took him across the Augean Sea to the island of Crete, a place that already pulsed with ancient myth. The king of Crete, Minos, had once promised Poseidon that he would sacrifice a magnificent bull that rose from the sea as a sign of his divine right to rule. But when the time came, Minos broke his word. He kept the bull for himself because of its stunning beauty. This act of hubris set off a chain reaction. The bull became wild, rampaging across the island, destroying crops, terrifying villages, shaming the king who had failed to honor the gods. By the time Hercules arrived, the creature had become more than a nuisance. It was a living symbol of broken oaths and divine wrath. The bull itself was no ordinary animal. Ancient descriptions painted it as radiant white, its breath steaming like fire, its hooves striking the earth with thunderous force. Its origins from the sea gave it an otherworldly quality, as though Poseidon's rage still clung to its hide. Locals told stories of the beast leaping over fences, crashing through olive groves, and appearing unexpectedly at night like a ghostly terror. In many ways, it embodied the chaotic forces of nature that rulers like Minos were expected to control. Hercules' task, however, wasn't just to kill the beast. He was to capture it alive and bring it back to the mainland. This added a new dimension of difficulty. Brute force alone would not be enough. The bull had to be subdued without being slain, a challenge that mirrored the delicate balance between man and god, strength and restraint. When Hercules arrived before King Minos, the king offered little resistance to the hero's mission. Some accounts even suggest Minos was secretly relieved. The creature had become a source of embarrassment. Minos' pride had created the monster, and now a foreign hero would clean up his divine mess. This dynamic added layers of political nuance to the labor, showing how Hercules' actions often intersected with the affairs of kings and gods alike. Crete itself was a place loaded with mythological significance, home of the labyrinth, the Minotaur, and the Palace of Nasus. By stepping onto this island, Hercules was entering a stage already crowded with legends. The Cretan bull was not just another task, it connected him to the broader web of Greek myth that would ripple far beyond his own story. Taming the beast. Sea versus strength. Hercules set out to find the bull in the wild countryside of Crete. Unlike previous labors, where he could confront his target in a fixed location, this required a hunt across open terrain, testing his endurance and tracking skills. For days he followed hoofprints through dusty hills and olive groves, listening for the distant bellow that echoed through the valleys. The chase culminated near the coast, where the bull stood, silhouetted against the crashing waves, as if Poseidon himself had staged the scene. The confrontation was intense. The bull charged like a thunderstorm, its massive horns slicing through the air. Hercules, anticipating the attack, sidestepped and seized the creature by the horns. A brutal struggle followed, hero and beast locked in a battle of will and sinew. The ground quaked beneath them. Hercules tightened his grip, leveraging not only his strength but also technique, twisting the bull's neck just enough to throw it off balance without breaking it. Slowly, through sheer persistence, he subdued the creature, forcing it to its knees in submission. The image of Hercules wrestling the bull became one of the most iconic scenes in Greek art. Vase paintings and temple carvings across the ancient world depicted this moment. The hero grasping the bull's horns, muscles straining, the animal frozen mid-roar. It wasn't merely a display of physical might. It was a statement about man's ability to confront and dominate the untamed powers of nature and the divine. Once captured, Hercules secured the bull with ropes and prepared it for transport. How exactly he managed to ferry the massive beast across the sea is left vague by myth. Some say he rode it across the Augean like a divine steed. others that it was bound on a ship under heavy guard. It symbolized Hercules' mastery, not only over land and beasts, but also over the unpredictable element of the sea itself. The capture of the Cretan bull was more than another tick on the list of labors. It was a reminder that the greatest challenges were often born from human arrogance in this case. Minos' refusal to honor the gods, and that Hercules, time and again, became the agent who restored cosmic balance. Bull cults and Greek religious echoes. The Cretan bull was not just a mythic creature, tapped into one of the oldest and most potent religious symbols in the ancient Mediterranean world. The bull is a sacred and dangerous power. Long before Greek myths were written down, Minoan Crete had celebrated bull-leaping rituals, athletic spectacles where youths vaulted over live bulls in acts of daring and reverence. These rituals, reflected in palace frescoes, reveal how deeply the bull was woven into the spiritual life of the island. It represented fertility, virility, divine strength, and sometimes divine punishment. When the Greeks later adopted and adapted Cretan myths, the bull became a recurring motif in their own stories, from Zeus transforming into a bull to abduct Europa, to the Minotaur lurking in the labyrinth. Hercules' capture of the Cretan bull fits into this broader pattern, symbolizing the conquest of ancient pre-Hellenic forces by newer heroic ideals. The bull wasn't just an animal. It was a bridge between older Earth-centered religions and the emerging Olympian order. Some scholars argue that this labor may reflect a historical memory. As Greek culture expanded, they encountered older bull-worshipping societies. And myths like this express the subjugation of those earlier religious systems. Hercules, the ultimate agent of Olympian will, defeats the bull, not to kill it, but to prove dominance and bring it under control. The bull's later fate is also telling. Once brought to the mainland, it roamed freely near Marathon until it was eventually killed by Theseus, another great Greek hero. This link between Hercules and Theseus shows how myths interlock to build a continuous heroic narrative, passing symbolic beasts from one story to another. Ultimately, this labor highlighted how mythology, religion, and politics intertwined in the ancient world. Hercules wasn't just doing the dirty work of kings. He was reshaping religious landscapes, taming symbols of power, and embedding himself in the spiritual consciousness of an entire civilization. The mares of Diomedes, flesh-eating nightmares. Among all the strange beasts Hercules faced, few were as horrifying as the mares of Diomedes. These were no ordinary horses. They were said to feast on human flesh. Owned by Diomedes, the brutal king of Thrace, these creatures were kept chained in iron to a bronze manger, their eyes wild and mouths stained with blood. According to legend, Diomedes fed his enemies and strangers to the mares as a grotesque form of entertainment, cementing his reputation as a tyrant who wielded fear like a weapon. Hercules was tasked with capturing and bringing these terrifying animals back to King Eurystheus. This was not a battle of brawn alone. Unlike the lion or the bull, these horses were living embodiments of cruelty and chaos, warped by human malice rather than divine origin. They symbolized a perversion of civilization. Animals once tamed to serve humans, now turned into devourers of men, reflecting their master's own barbarity. Thrace itself was depicted in Greek thought as a wild, untamed land on the fringes of the Greek world. It was a place of fierce warriors, strange rituals, and foreign gods. To venture there was to step into a liminal zone between civilization and savagery. The mares thrived in this environment, an extension of their king's cruelty and the untamed nature of his land. For Hercules, this labor would test not just his strength, but also his ability to impose order on creatures twisted by human evil. Where divine beasts had clear mythic rules, these horses were unpredictable, driven by hunger and madness. Their capture would require strategy, timing, and an understanding of the human villain who controlled them. As Hercules approached the stables under the dark Thracian sky, the sound of the horses gnashing their teeth echoed like the rattling of chains in a tomb. He was not just entering a battlefield, he was stepping into a nightmare crafted by men, not gods. Taming with brutality, Diomedes' fate, Hercules knew that confronting the mares directly would be dangerous. Their strength was said to rival that of bulls, and their frenzied hunger made them nearly impossible to control. So he turned his attention to Diomedes himself, understanding that the beast's fury mirrored their master's will. Diomedes, a cruel and arrogant ruler, met Hercules with hostility. leading his Thracian warriors to confront the hero in open battle. The clash was fierce. Hercules, wielding his massive club, cut through the Thracian ranks like a storm. Diomedes himself entered the fray, but despite his reputation, he was no match for the demigod. Hercules overpowered and captured him, dragging the king to his own stables. What followed is one of the darker turns in the hero's myth. Hercules fed Diomedes to his own mares. This act was brutal, but it carried symbolic weight. By turning the king's cruelty back upon him, Hercules enacted a kind of mythic justice. The mares, tasting the flesh of their master, were momentarily calmed, as if their unnatural hunger had been sated by poetic vengeance. This moment is often depicted as both horrifying and cathartic, the tyrant destroyed by the very monsters he created. Once Diomedes was dead, the mares became far more manageable. It was as though their madness had been fueled by their bond with their cruel owner. Hercules bound them together, their once bloodthirsty eyes now subdued, and prepared to transport them back to Eurystheus. This labor showcased Hercules not merely as a slayer of beasts, but as a dealer of justice, turning human evil against itself. It blurred the line between heroism and vengeance, a recurring theme in many of his labors. Horses and sacrifice in Greek lore. The tale of Diomedes' mares resonates with deep cultural currents in ancient Greek thought. Horses were powerful symbols associated with nobility, war, and status, yet they also carried darker undertones. In some ancient rituals, horses were sacrificed to the gods, their blood offered in rites tied to fertility, war, or death. Thrace, in particular, was infamous in Greek imagination for its wild horse cultures and its brutal sacrificial practices. The idea of man-eating horses may have grown from stories of such extreme rituals, transformed through myth into literal monsters. In this sense, the mares reflect human cruelty exaggerated to mythic proportions, turning sacred animals into instruments of horror. Diomedes' role adds another layer. He represents rulers who abuse their power, twisting what should be noble in this case, the keeping of horses, into a symbol of tyranny. By conquering both king and beasts, Hercules reasserted the natural order, in which humans control animals, not the other way around. The horse's eventual fate varies by source. Some say they were dedicated to Hera, others that they were released and wandered freely until they reached Mount Olympus, where they were devoured by wild beasts. Their end is often abrupt, as if the myth had served its purpose, to tell a story not about their lives but about the human cruelty that birthed them. Through this labor, Hercules confronted not just monsters but the monstrous potential within humanity. The mares of Diomedes are a mirror, reflecting how human brutality can create legends that haunt the edges of civilization. The belt of Hippolyta. Amazonian diplomacy for his ninth labor, King Eurystheus commanded Hercules to obtain the girdle or belt of Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons. Unlike previous tasks of brute force, this mission began with diplomacy. The Amazons were no ordinary people. They were a society of fierce, independent warrior women who lived on the fringes of the Greek world. In Greek imagination, they embodied both fascination and fear, a reversal of gender norms. Where women ruled, fought, and defended their territory without men, Hercules sailed with a band of heroes across the Augean Sea, passing islands whispered to be haunted by gods, and finally reached the Vimasira region, said to lie along the Thermodon River. Upon arrival, Hercules didn't attack. Instead, he approached Hippolyta openly, explaining his quest. Remarkably, she welcomed him. Accounts differ, but one popular version describes Hippolyta as being curious about the famous son of Zeus. She agreed to give him the belt willingly, gift symbolizing respect rather than conquest. Her belt was no ordinary ornament. It was said to have been given by Ares himself, the god of war, and represented her authority as queen and warrior. This initial peaceful exchange reveals that not all of Hercules' labors were savage confrontations. Some involved diplomacy, negotiation, and cultural encounters between Greeks and foreign peoples. Behind this myth lies fascinating cultural subtext. The Amazons were often used by Greek storytellers to explore themes of the other, a society outside Greek norms, both admired for bravery and feared for its inversion of gender roles. The idea that Hercules could win the belt through conversation, not combat, reflects how Greek myths sometimes acknowledged mutual respect between hero and foreign leader. But as with many Greek stories, the gods would not allow peace to last long. Hera, ever determined to ruin Hercules, prepared to intervene once more. Hera's deception and the Amazon battle, Hera's hatred burned hotter than ever. Seeing Hercules succeeding through peaceful means was intolerable to her, especially when it involved the Amazons, a race that symbolized female power. Disguising herself as an Amazon warrior, Hera spread whispers among Hippolyta's people. Hercules is not here for diplomacy. He plans to abduct your queen. Panic spread like wildfire through the camp. The Amazons, famed for their sudden cavalry strikes, mounted their horses and charged toward the Greek ships. Hercules, taken by surprise, found himself surrounded. What began as a diplomatic mission transformed into a chaotic battle. The clash between Greek heroes and Amazonian riders was brutal and fast. The Amazons, armed with bows and curved swords, attacked in swift formations, their horses trained for war. Hercules fought fiercely, striking down warriors while trying to reach Hippolyta. Tragically, in the confusion, he believed she had betrayed him. Some versions say he killed her in the fight and took the belt by force. Others say she died defending him from her own people. Either way, blood stained the ground, and the peaceful exchange shattered into mythic tragedy. This deception by Hera isn't merely a plot twist. It reflects the Greek belief that the gods controlled fate, even when mortals tried to act with reason. Hercules' labor, meant to be diplomatic, was transformed into another violent conquest by divine interference. It's also symbolic. The belt, once offered freely, had to be taken through battle, aligning the myth with the Greek heroic ideal that true glory comes through struggle, not negotiation. Myths of the Amazons in Greek imagination. The episode with Hippolyta opened a window into how the Greeks perceived the Amazons, and through them, their own cultural anxieties. The Amazons were portrayed as living on the edges of the known world. Beyond Thrace, or near the Black Sea, regions associated with mystery and danger. To the Greeks, they were simultaneously fascinating and threatening. Women who defied gender expectations, warriors who rivaled men in strength and leadership. Through myths like Hercules' ninth labor, the Amazons served as a mirror, reflecting Greek ideals and fears. In art, Amazons were frequently depicted wearing short chitons, wielding axes or bows and riding horses, elements inspired by the real horse-riding cultures of the Eurasian steppes. Some historians suggest that the Amazons may have been inspired by Scythian warrior women, known from archaeological finds of female skeletons buried with weapons. To the Greeks, these distant peoples represented both exotic otherness and a challenge to their world order. Myths like this allowed storytellers to grapple with these tensions. Hercules' journey into Amazon territory is thus more than a heroic episode. It is a cultural encounter, a symbolic clash between Greek masculine heroism and foreign feminine power. By bringing back Hippolyta's belt, Hercules not only fulfilled his task but also metaphorically subdued the Amazon threat in Greek imagination. Yet, the tragedy of Hera's deception lingers, reminding us that even heroes cannot escape divine machinations. The Cattle of Geryon, Journey to the Edge of the World. For his 10th labor, King Eurystheus tasked Hercules with a quest unlike any before. To travel to the far western edge of the known world and bring back the magnificent red cattle of Geryon, a monstrous ruler said to live on the island of Erythia, the Red Land, near the setting sun. Unlike previous labors centered around beasts or sacred creatures in Greek lands, this mission forced Hercules to journey into mythic geography, where the boundaries between the mortal world and the divine blurred. Ancient Greeks believed that beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now associate with the Strait of Gibraltar, lay the great, mysterious ocean encircling the earth. This was the frontier of myth, where gods, monsters, and the unknown waited. Hercules began his westward trek by crossing North Africa, a journey that itself became legendary. In one episode, he was overcome by the scorching heat of the desert. Infuriated, he drew his bow and aimed at Helios, the sun god himself. Rather than punishing him, Helios admired the hero's boldness and lent him a golden cup or boat, which he used to sail across the ocean to reach Erythea. This golden vessel, often depicted in ancient art as a radiant bowl, symbolized Hercules. elevation from mortal wanderer to a kind of cosmic traveler, a hero who could traverse the heavens like the sun itself. Along the way, Hercules encountered various local figures and creatures that became woven into regional myths. In Libya, for example, some traditions tell of his encounter with Antaeus, the giant who drew strength from the earth, whom Hercules defeated by lifting him into the air and crushing him. Each stop on this journey represents more than just travel. It's myth layered on geography, showing how Greek storytellers stitched local tales into Hercules' larger saga. By the time Hercules finally saw the glowing shores of Erythea, he had crossed not just distance but thresholds between worlds. Three-body monster in the Sunset Isles on Erythea, Hercules faced Geryon, one of the strangest figures in Greek mythology. Geryon was no ordinary king. He was described as a giant with 3 bodies, 3 heads, and 3 sets of arms, all joined at the waist. He ruled over the red cattle and lived with his herdsman, Erymanthian, and a monstrous 2-headed hound named Orthrus, brother of Cerberus. The cattle themselves were magnificent, glowing red like the evening sun, symbolizing their place at the western edge of the world, the land of sunset, death, and divine power. Before Hercules could face Geryon, he had to deal with Orthrus and Erymanthian. He swiftly clubbed the hound to death, just as he had once killed the Nemean lion and dispatched Erymanthian with ease. But the real challenge came when Geryon himself approached. This 3-bodied giant, armed with weapons in each hand, advanced with terrifying strength. The battle was not one of trickery or prolonged struggle, but of sheer decisive power. Hercules, wielding his bow, shot a single poisoned arrow that pierced through all 3 bodies at once, killing Geryon instantly. This image, a hero felling a triple-bodied monster with a single shot, became one of the most iconic moments in his myth. The symbolism of this encounter is profound. Geryon, a triple figure living at the sunset edge of the world, represents the chaotic forces beyond civilization, the unknown that must be conquered for order to prevail. By killing him, Hercules metaphorically tamed the edge of the world itself, asserting Greek heroism over cosmic chaos. Ancient poets like Stesichorus and Hesiod dwelled on this moment, treating it almost like a mythic conquest of the western frontier, centuries before explorers like Alexander or the Romans dreamed of expansion. Hercules versus Geryon, bow, arrows, and power. After defeating Geryon, Hercules gathered the sacred cattle and prepared for the long journey back to Greece. The adventure was far from over. Driving the herd across continents presented its own challenges, as the gods and local rulers repeatedly tried to stop him. One famous episode involves Hera sending gadflies to scatter the herd. The cattle fled in different directions, forcing Hercules to chase them across the Italian peninsula, Thrace, and beyond. These scattered adventures became localized myths. Towns and regions claimed that Hercules had passed through, linking their geography to his epic return. At one point, Hercules encountered Cacus, a fire-breathing giant who lived near the future site of Rome. Cacus stole some of the cattle and hid them in his cave, dragging them backward to conceal their tracks. But their lowing gave them away, and Hercules discovered the theft. A fierce battle followed, ending with Hercules strangling Cacus and reclaiming the herd. Roman mythology would later seize on this story, integrating Hercules into the legendary foundation of Rome, portraying him as a heroic figure who cleansed their land of monsters. Finally, after countless detours, Hercules returned to King Eurystheus with the cattle. Some versions say the king sacrificed them to Hera, others say they were released. The journey was a feat not only of physical endurance, but of cosmic scope, spanning oceans, deserts, and mythic lands. Hercules' 10th labor established him not just as a hero of Greece, but as a figure whose exploits touched the entire known world, a pan-Mediterranean conqueror in mythic form. The Apples of the Hesperides, a quest for immortality. For his 11th labor, Eurystheus ordered Hercules to retrieve the golden apples of the Hesperides, sacred fruits said to grant immortality. These apples were kept in a lush, hidden garden at the western edge of the world, beyond mortal lands, guarded by divine nymphs, the Hesperides, daughters of the evening star and a fearsome 100-headed dragon named Ladon. The garden itself belonged to Hera, who planted the tree as a wedding gift from Gaia. By choosing this task, Eurystheus wasn't simply testing Hercules' strength, he was sending him on a cosmic scavenger hunt that required cunning, diplomacy, and mythic navigation. Unlike previous labors, Hercules didn't know the garden's location at first. His journey to find it was a saga in itself, filled with encounters with gods, prophets, and mythic beings. One of the most important stops was his meeting with Nereus, the old man of the sea, a shape-shifting deity who knew all the world's secrets. Hercules caught Nereus as he slept and held him tightly through his transformations: lion, serpent, fire, until the god finally revealed the location of the Hesperides. This encounter emphasizes Hercules' intelligence and tenacity. He wasn't merely a brute, but a hero who could outlast divine trickery. His travels also brought him face to face with legendary figures like Prometheus, the titan who gave fire to humanity and suffered eternal torment. Hercules, moved by Prometheus' plight, slew the eagle that tormented him, earning the titan's gratitude. Prometheus in return gave crucial advice: to seek Atlas' help in retrieving the apples. This was a turning point. Instead of charging straight into the garden, Hercules would use cunning and negotiation to complete his task. Atlas and the sky. Trickery versus Titan strength. When Hercules found Atlas, the Titan was standing at the edge of the world, holding up the sky on his shoulders as punishment from Zeus. Atlas was the father of the Hesperides, and thus uniquely able to enter the garden unharmed. Hercules proposed a deal. He would take the sky on his shoulders temporarily, relieving Atlas of his eternal burden if Atlas would fetch the golden apples for him. Atlas eagerly agreed, seeing a chance to taste freedom for the first time in eons. Hercules then performed one of his most awe-inspiring feats. He physically bore the weight of the heavens. Ancient art and literature describe this moment with reverence, the hero straining under the cosmic dome, his feet planted on the edge of the world. Meanwhile, Atlas strode into the garden, killed or lulled, laden sources vary, and plucked the radiant golden apples from the tree. When he returned, however, Atlas had a new idea. He told Hercules he would deliver the apples to Eurystheus himself, leaving the hero to hold the sky forever. Hercules responded not with force but with wit. He pretended to accept Atlas's proposal, but asked the Titan to briefly take the sky back so he could adjust his cloak for padding. Atlas agreed, shifting the heavens back onto his shoulders, and Hercules seized the moment, grabbed the apples, and departed, leaving the stunned Titan to resume his eternal burden. This clever maneuver revealed a different side of Hercules: strategist, trickster, and master negotiator, not just a brawler. Golden apples and ancient symbolism. The golden apples were not just treasures. They were symbols of divine perfection and immortality. Greek mythology, they echo earlier. Near Eastern motifs of sacred fruits guarded at the edges of the world, like the apples in Norse Adone's orchard, or the fruit of immortality in Mesopotamian legends. By seizing them, Hercules momentarily crossed into the divine sphere, bringing something celestial back to mortal kings. This wasn't merely a heroic task. It was a transgressive act that symbolized humanity reaching into the realm of the gods. Ancient poets and philosophers interpreted this labor in various ways. Some saw it as a symbol of overcoming death, as the apples represented eternal life. Others viewed the Hesperides garden as a metaphor for paradise or the afterlife, a distant, inaccessible place of eternal evening light. Hercules showed that even the most sacred treasures could be reached through determination and cunning, though ultimately the apples were returned to the gods, reinforcing that divine gifts cannot remain among mortals. Eurystheus, as usual, was terrified when Hercules presented the apples. Some myths say he gave them back to Hercules, unsure what to do with them. Others say Athena herself took the apples and returned them to the garden. Either way, this labor elevated Hercules' legend beyond physical feats. He had outwitted a Titan, journeyed to the ends of the earth, and briefly held objects tied to immortality, achievements that set him apart from every mortal hero before him. Cerberus and the Underworld, final descent. Before Hercules could claim his place among legends, Eurystheus demanded the impossible. He was to descend into the realm of the dead and bring back Cerberus, the monstrous three-headed guardian of Hades' gates. This was no mere beast hunt. This was a direct confrontation with death itself. The journey began at Tanarum, a cave at the southern tip of the Peloponnese, believed to be an entrance to the underworld. Ancient Greeks viewed this place with awe and terror. Many believed that only shades and heroes could cross its threshold and return. Hercules, armed only with his lion skin and club, descended into the darkness, his every step echoing into realms where mortal light dared not shine. As Hercules moved deeper, the landscape shifted into something otherworldly. Rivers of mist curled around skeletal trees. Distant wails echoed from unseen souls. Soon he reached the banks of the Styx, the river that separated the living from the dead. There, the silent ferryman Charon waited. Normally, no living soul could cross, but Hercules' sheer divine presence made the old boatman tremble. Ancient poets often describe this moment as a clash between mortal defiance and cosmic order. Charon ferried him across without payment, knowing that to refuse a son of Zeus would bring divine wrath. On the other side, Hercules encountered the shades of the dead, including figures from his past. Among them was Meleager, the fallen hero of the Caledonian boar hunt, who spoke to Hercules of his sister Deianira, foreshadowing events that would one day lead to Hercules' tragic end. It's a striking narrative moment, the hero's greatest triumph set against the shadow of his ultimate downfall. These encounters are more than myth, they reflect how the Greeks viewed heroism as bound tightly to fate, glory always paired with looming tragedy. Finally, Hercules stood before Hades and Persephone, did not draw his club, nor challenge the Lord of the Dead with violence. Instead, he asked permission to take Cerberus to the surface. Hades, impressed by his courage, agreed, but only if Hercules could subdue the beast without weapons. This was a true test of strength and will, not divine trickery. With the gods' assent, Hercules ventured to the gates, where Cerberus stood snarling, three heads snapping, serpent tail writhing, eyes blazing with infernal fire. The clash was brutal. Hercules threw himself onto the monstrous dog, wrapping his arms around its three necks. Cerberus fought with supernatural fury, but Hercules held on, muscles straining like iron cables. Slowly, impossibly, he overpowered the beast not by killing it, but by forcing its submission. This moment symbolizes Hercules' power, not to destroy death, but to confront and master it temporarily. He dragged Cerberus, still struggling, toward the realm of the living, his final labor complete, and death itself momentarily bridled. Hercules versus death, dragging the beast to light. Emerging from the underworld, Hercules led Cerberus toward the sunlit world, a sight that struck terror into all who saw it. Ancient sources describe villagers fleeing in panic, thinking the end times had come as the monstrous dog howled beneath daylight skies. This act was not only a physical feat, but a cosmic transgression, bringing a creature of Hades into the realm of mortals. It's a moment where myth brushes against the metaphysical. The boundary between life and death was breached. Only Hercules could pull it off. When Hercules arrived in Tiryns with Cerberus, Eurystheus was so terrified that he hid inside a large storage jar and begged Hercules to return the beast immediately. This comedic detail, repeated by many ancient writers, emphasizes the absurdity of a mortal king commanding a demigod. Eurystheus' fear highlights the huge gap between bureaucratic authority and mythic power. The labors, originally meant to humble Hercules, ended with the king himself humbled in terror. Hercules did not linger. He carefully dragged Cerberus back to the underworld, fulfilling his promise to Hades. This is significant. Hercules doesn't conquer death permanently. He borrows victory, shows his might, and then respects divine law by returning the guardian. This balance of defiance and reverence is key to understanding why the Greeks revered him not just as a strong man, but as a hero who walked the edge of cosmic rules. Mythologists often interpret this final labor as Hercules' symbolic death and rebirth. Descending to Hades and returning is an archetype seen in many cultures. Sumerian myths of Inanna, Egyptian tales of Ra's night journey, or later Christian narratives of descent and resurrection. Hercules' feat fits into this broader human pattern. The hero must face death, descend into darkness, and return transformed. It marks the culmination of his trials, not just physical, but spiritual. By completing this last labor, Hercules transcended the status of a wandering penitent. His labors were no longer about atonement. They were now about achieving immortality through deeds so extraordinary that no mortal could match them. The stage was set for his eventual apotheosis, his elevation to godhood, apotheosis from mortal trials to immortal glory. With his labors complete, Hercules' legend didn't end, elevated. Though this chapter falls just outside the traditional 12 labors, It is a natural epilogue to his mythic arc. After years of heroic deeds, tragedies, and superhuman trials, Hercules eventually faced death not in battle, but through betrayal and fate a poisoned cloak sent by his wife Deianira. In agony, he built his own funeral pyre on Mount Ota. As flames engulfed him, the skies opened. Zeus intervened, lifting his son from mortal suffering into the realm of the gods. The apotheosis of Hercules' transformation from demigod to full deity was a powerful message to the Greeks. It signified that even a life of immense suffering could end in divine reward if one achieved enough glory and endurance. Temples were built in his honor, cults spread throughout Greece and Rome, and emperors centuries later would associate themselves with Hercules to claim his aura of unstoppable strength and divine legitimacy. Interestingly, Roman culture embraced Hercules even more fervently than the Greeks. To them, he embodied virtues, courage, endurance, and strength in the face of overwhelming odds. Statues of Hercules appeared everywhere, from public baths to imperial palaces. His 12 labors were painted, carved, and recited endlessly, serving as moral lessons, entertainment, and political symbolism. In mythic terms, Hercules' journey mirrors the hero's journey cycle in its purest form, adorned with divine potential, challenged by impossible trials. Descending to the realm of death and finally transcending mortality, his story laid narrative foundations echoed in countless legends afterward. Every chapter of his life carried both brutal realism and spiritual resonance. Thus ends the saga of Hercules not with a single act of heroism, but with a lifetime of trials that reshaped how ancient cultures understood strength, suffering, and transcendence. From his first breath to his fiery ascent to Olympus, Hercules' tale remains one of humanity's oldest and most enduring epics. Hercules, after the labors, a hero among mortals. Once Hercules completed his 12 labors, his story didn't simply end in triumph. In Greek myth, heroes often found that glory was followed by restlessness. Hercules, now celebrated across the Hellenic world, continued to undertake new adventures, sometimes out of divine command, other times driven by his own heroic instinct. He joined expeditions, fought wars, and lent his strength to others' quests. Among these later exploits were his campaigns against Troy long before the Trojan War, and his aiding of the Olympian gods against the giants during the Gigantomachy. These stories reveal a man who could never truly retire from heroism. His legend was a living thing, constantly expanding through oral tradition. What's fascinating is how regional myths evolved around Hercules. Every city-state wanted to claim a piece of his legacy. In some traditions, he was said to have traveled as far as the edges of the known world, establishing altars in Spain, North Africa, and Asia Minor. Greek colonists, when founding new cities, often erected a Heraclean sanctuary to Hercules as a protective marker. In this way, his myth was woven into geography, turning real landscapes into extensions of his story. Religiously, Hercules began to transition from a wandering, suffering hero to a figure of cult worship. Shrines and temples were erected in his name, where people prayed not just for strength, but also for relief from suffering and protection from evil. Hercules had walked among men, endured their pain, and conquered trials that mirrored life's hardest struggles. This made him uniquely approachable among demigods, half mortal, half divine, and fully familiar with human hardship. Artists and poets of the classical period used these post-labor adventures to explore different sides of Hercules: his temper, his humanity, his humor, and his flaws. Plays like those of Euripides delved into his psychological depth, while vase paintings and sculptures portrayed him in moments of both triumph and domestic vulnerability. The figure of Hercules became multifaceted. Representing more than brute strength, it symbolized resilience, moral testing, and the weight of destiny. By the late classical era, Hercules stood at a unique cultural crossroads. He was no longer merely a mythic hero who had completed 12 tasks. He had become a cultural archetype, evolving from story to symbol. This evolution set the stage for his powerful reinvention in the Roman world. Roman Hercules: virtues, power, and empire. When the Romans adopted Greek mythology, Hercules, or Hercules Invictus, became one of their most important mythic imports. Unlike in Greece, where Heracles was a tragic hero as much as a conqueror, the Romans emphasized his invincibility, strength, and civic virtues. They saw in him a model of virtues, the masculine ideal of courage, endurance, and dominance over adversity. This made him a perfect symbol for Roman power. Roman generals and emperors frequently associated themselves with Hercules. Temples were built in his honor throughout the empire, including the famous Era Maxima Herculis in Rome, where merchants and soldiers alike offered sacrifices. Emperors like Commodus went so far as to dress as Hercules publicly, wielding a club and wearing a lion's skin, to project an image of superhuman authority. In doing so, Hercules became more than a hero, he became a political symbol, a divine figure whose strength legitimized imperial rule. Art and literature flourished with Hercules imagery during this period. Mosaics depicted his labors in vivid detail. Grand sculptures showed him leaning on his club in the Hercules Farnese pose, a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. Latin poets like Ovid and Seneca retold his stories, emphasizing moral lessons, perseverance against impossible odds, or the reward of divine immortality after suffering. To the Romans, Hercules represented not just adventure, but the moral backbone of empire. Interestingly, Roman religion blurred the line between myth and civic life. Hercules' cult had public festivals, rituals, and oaths sworn in his name. Soldiers prayed to him before campaigns. Merchants invoked him for safe passage and prosperous trade. The universality of Hercules' appeal from elite emperors to common laborers was a rare phenomenon in ancient religion. By the height of the Roman Empire, Hercules was no longer simply a hero of mythic Greece. He had been transformed into a living symbol of Rome's strength, endurance, and divine favor. His image was everywhere carved in stone, minted on coins, invoked in law, and celebrated in spectacle. Medieval and Renaissance Hercules, allegory and humanism, as the ancient world gave way to the Christian era. Pagan myths like Hercules were not entirely erased, they were reinterpreted. During the Middle Ages, Hercules' image persisted in manuscripts, allegories, and moral tales. Christian writers sometimes recast him as a moral exemplar, a figure who conquered monsters representing sin, vice, or heresy. The 12 labors were allegorized as stages of spiritual purification, aligning the pagan hero's trials with Christian moral narratives. In medieval bestiaries and illuminated manuscripts, Hercules appeared slaying beasts not as acts of glory, but as moral lessons. The Nemean lion as pride, the Hydra as heresy, Cerberus as death itself. Through this lens, Hercules was no longer a demigod in conflict with gods, but a proto-Christian warrior, unknowingly prefiguring Christ's triumph over evil. This blending of mythologies allowed pagan heroes to survive in a Christian world, not as literal figures, but as moral metaphors. The Renaissance revived Hercules with a vengeance. As Europe rediscovered classical art and literature, humanists celebrated Hercules as the ultimate symbol of human potential, a man who overcame suffering and achieved immortality through virtue and strength. Artists like Pagliulo and Michelangelo sculpted and painted Hercules with a focus on anatomical perfection, reflecting Renaissance ideals of physical and intellectual excellence. Philosophers and rulers, too, embraced Hercules. Renaissance princes likened their reigns to his labors, portraying themselves as civilizing heroes, as conquering chaos and ignorance. The Hercules at the Crossroads theme, where Hercules must choose between vice and virtue, became a popular allegory for moral choice, appearing in countless paintings and plays. This interpretation shifted focus from mythic feats to inner moral struggle, aligning Hercules with the Renaissance spirit of individual agency and ethical self-fashioning. Thus, Hercules endured through the Middle Ages and Renaissance, not as a forgotten pagan relic, but as a malleable, symbol moral, artistic, intellectual adapting seamlessly to new cultural currents, while retaining his heroic essence. Hercules in modern imagination. From epic hero to pop icon in the modern era, Hercules has evolved yet again, from ancient demigod and imperial emblem to a global cultural icon. His image appears in literature, opera, film, comic books, video games, and theme parks. Each era reinterprets him to reflect its own values, from the noble, tragic hero of classical epics to the charismatic, muscular adventurer of modern entertainment. In the 19th century, romantic poets like Byron and Goethe saw Hercules as a symbol of human struggle against destiny. In the early 20th century, silent films depicted his labors in grand spectacle, introducing his myth to mass audiences. Later, Hollywood transformed him into a larger-than-life action hero, especially in the mid-20th century sword and sandal epics. These films often took liberties with the myths but preserved the core theme, a hero confronting overwhelming trials. Hercules also became a figure in comic books and modern fantasy. From Marvel's Hercules joining superhero teams to Japanese manga, reimagining his labors with mythic mecha hybrids. His adaptability is astonishing. He fits seamlessly into both high culture and pop culture, embodying whatever traits a given society prizes: strength, humor, moral struggle, or spectacle. Perhaps most striking is how modern audiences interpret his story psychologically. The labors are now often seen as metaphors for personal growth, slaying one's own lions and hydras, overcoming addiction, grief, or fear. Self-help books, leadership seminars, and motivational speakers reference Hercules to inspire resilience. His ancient myth has become a universal story of endurance, transcending religious or cultural boundaries. From ancient caves to cinema screens, from cult worship to comic panels, Hercules remains one of the most enduring figures in human storytelling. His journey has outlasted empires, religions, and artistic movements, because at its heart lies something timeless: the human will to confront the impossible, suffer through it, and emerge transformed. And so, the saga of Hercules comes to a close. From the moment of his divine yet turbulent birth, through the fury of Hera's vengeance, to the 12 impossible trials that tested not only his strength but his very soul, Hercules has walked a path unlike any other. His story is more than myth. It's a mirror of humanity's endless struggle against chaos, suffering, and destiny itself. Across centuries, his legend has shifted and evolved, echoing through temples, Roman forums, medieval manuscripts, Renaissance canvases, and modern screens. Yet through it all, one truth remains: Hercules endures, not as a flawless hero, but as a symbol of resilience, sacrifice, and transformation. If you've stayed with this journey until now, you've essentially walked alongside him through forests of lions, swamps of hydras, frozen peaks, sun-drenched isles, and even the gates of the underworld itself. This has been more than just a story. It's been a voyage across time, myth, and culture. If you enjoyed this deep dive into ancient mythology, make sure to hit the like button. Subscribe and turn on all notifications so you never miss the next journey into the bizarre, the legendary, and the forgotten corners of history. And in the comments below, tell us which of Hercules' labors fascinated you the most, or which mythological figure should we explore next. Thank you for watching. And remember, legends never die. They're simply waiting to be retold. Until next time, this is Weird History Secrets, signing off.